Our speaker today has been, what I know of, and I'm certainly going to learn along with you all of what else she has gotten up to. But this processing step is so crucial of the sort of the value chain and how so many people don't actually know where their food is coming from. And this is a person who knows perhaps how the sausage is made. So with that, we've got Christy Miller of Marfa Meats, who owned and operated the now closed, big tear from my eye, Marfa Meats, a processing facility in far West Texas. So Christy, what is your background? How did you find yourself to the food system?
Well, right out of college, I started working with IT consulting firm. So my very first job out of college was a programmer, and then really stayed with consulting for 20 plus years. Completely different worlds from the food system, zero relationship. And then really what happened was I was living in Denver in the city. Where I lived, you couldn't even stand between my house and my neighbor's house and stretch your arms out. The houses are that close together. And then just by chance passed through Marfa, Texas, which is where I am now, on a road trip, fell in love with the place. Long story short, over the years, built a place here. I was kind of back and forth to Denver. And then, the balance of my time kept skewing further and further toward Marfa until I was here. And my friends in Denver were like, "Did you move?" So living in a small town, it's probably similar in most small towns. It's just hard to get great food. Distribution networks are a pain. We call it a desert island out here. So what you find at the grocery store is not beautiful produce and definitely terrible meat. And it was blowing my mind because we're surrounded by cows everywhere. And I was like, how can this be that we live in cattle country and the meat that you see at the store is foul? And so it was really just sort of a question more than anything. And I started poking around and asking some people, what's the deal with that? And I honestly, to be frank, never even thought about why I couldn't, what I didn't even realize, I guess, that the processors were the gap in the market. I was just like, I don't get it. There are cows, there's no meat. What's going on? And so really what I ended up doing was talking to a couple of producers out here, because a friend of mine's like, no one can answer your questions, Christy, just go talk to them. And I was like, okay, fine. So then I cold called a rancher. Hey, this is what I want to talk about. And long story short, we became very close friends, and he is the one who really sort of opened my eyes to what the system, that circle that you showed on your diagram, how that actually works, and that the major gap that we were experiencing here was that there were no processors. And there had been, I think, up until like the early 90s, there was one in a town about a half hour from here. They closed, same story. Really across the country, small processors have a hard time making it. So anyway, it had been decades since there was a processor here, and Ellery Often Garden was the producer that I was referring to. He really wanted to sell people his beef, but he very clearly did not want to, get into the meatpacking business. And so this conversation went on for quite some time. And I kind of joke now because I think he was like, I'm not sure she's going to do this, so I'm just going to push her over the edge. So basically started telling everyone I was doing it. And then, I started getting calls from all these ranchers. When are you going to open? Okay, can we get on the list? We want, so I was like, okay, there's clearly a need here. And so, I don't know how much more detail you want me to get into regarding how I got to this point, but that was basically it. And then, honestly, it was still very much in flux. There were so obviously so many things to figure out. Opening a business like this doesn't just, you can't snap your fingers and make it happen. So I was in the process of researching, how was I going to do it? Was I going to go with these modular units, or was I going to build? And then Ellery died. And so that was just, heartbreaking. And also, if I hadn't already fully committed to it, then I did at that point, because it was our project, we were in it together, and I felt like I needed to, for myself, yes, but also for him, to bring that project to fruition. So that's kind of how it happened. Why in the world I thought I could make that happen, that's another question.
Well, I think that really points to so many people in agriculture. Yes, they love the land. Yes, they love food, but it's so much about relationships and like it just sounds like it rings really true.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Everyone in, and I think you've already talked about this a little bit, everyone in agriculture seems to wear many hats. What are some of the things what are some of your hats? It can be related to agriculture. It could be now. I know Marfa Meats is closed, or you could sort of put your Marfa Meats hat back on and talk about what you were doing then, however you would like to answer that question.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably true for many small businesses, but an agricultural related business in particular. I mean, on any given day, I would be in the office, taking people's cut sheet and, checking people out, to, loading up hundreds of pounds of beef, to using the tractor to truck guts over to the composter. It really ran the gamut. And honestly, it was one of the greatest joys, is seeing the whole process. And I have no problem getting my hands dirty and really being able to understand every single bit of it. I mean, I think, coming from a consulting background, maybe your specialty is, order management, and you kind of understand how they bill the people, but it's not your department, and you have your segment of knowledge, and that's what you focus on. In a small business in agriculture, you have to be able to figure everything out. I mean, the producers out here joke like, yeah, okay, they're ranchers, but they're also plumbers and electricians, and if it breaks, you fix it. No one's going to drive an hour out to your ranch and figure out why your water line is frozen or where it cracked under the ground. You have to figure it out. And also, I think that's a measure of being in a small town too. I mean, I know way more about electrical than I ever wanted to know, because we had, I didn't know what single phase and 3-phase was before this all started, and so you're forced to learn, because you must keep the lights on, because the animals are hanging in the cooler. You can't just say, oh yeah, well, we'll take the week off. It's critical. There's a flow. And I mean, for us too, it wasn't just, the meat that we had that was hanging there that we're responsible for, which, when that cooler was full, would be hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of beef. So there's like a huge financial liability if something goes wrong, or, if you're not maintaining the cooler temps, and there's a lot of responsibility there, but not just from a scheduling perspective, staying on track for that, but it's like there is a flow, and these producers and families that have slaughter dates for their animals, they are planning on that schedule being met, because they're like us, they're doing 25 different things, and if they have one day that they're going to drive 3 hours to drop their animal off here, we need to be available that day to bring it in and slaughter it. And then, there's all of this downstream impact. For example, please stop me at any point if I'm off track. For example, there were several small businesses that were able to start because we were in business. So there's a small town about an hour or so from here. They among other things, they have a small sort of convenience store, but because that town is so rural, people grocery shop there. Well, the guy, is raising cattle, but he was shipping them off, cow calf operation. And then he realized, oh, well, if I can slaughter some, then I can sell this fresh meat in the convenience store. And there are a lot of oil workers out there. So for him, it was like, oh, well, now I have a whole new business. So he was bringing us 4 or 5 animals every 2 weeks. And so it was critical that we were able to keep on schedule, because if not, then he has nothing to sell. And, those people become reliant on it. And so, that said, yes, wearing many hats, it is not like other businesses where you can just say, we'll wait until the repair guy comes. If the packaging machine isn't working, then guess what? We're doing it by hand. I mean, the meat's got to go out. You always have like your best case scenario, but you've also got your plan B and then your plan C, because the show must go on. And so I think that being able to accept that fact and get creative about how you solve problems, I would say is like one of the biggest lessons we all learned. And I say like all of the employees too, because they come from the world where, well, yeah, just wait for someone to come. Well, no one's coming. So how are we going to figure it out? It's a real empowering also to realize you have more skill than you realize, and thank God for YouTube.
Hopefully they'll say that about this channel as well. Yeah, it sounds like it's like you talked so much about flow and then anything that disrupts the flow, and how much how rewarding it was to be like have people relying on you, and then realize you can figure things out to meet those obligations. What motivates you in your work? How does your work align with your interests and values?
I think that the motivation when it came to Marfa Meats is really feeling a sense of purpose that I don't think at least has existed for me in other kinds of work, because feeding people is hugely rewarding. But as I alluded to earlier, it's not just the direct to consumer relationship where, yes, we slaughter an animal and we sell them a ribeye or a tenderloin that they make for their family for Christmas. Like, all that's great. But it's the being able to empower other individuals to start their own small businesses. Like the existence of Marfa Meats was the jumping off point for many other folks who were able to start a business that they wouldn't have been able to start before. So, I mean, that is hugely rewarding. And also, while we had many challenges with labor, seeing folks grow and build a skill set from never seeing a carcass before to absolutely owning it and knowing how to break it all down and knowing how to identify situations that were strange, or like, okay, is there something wrong with this carcass or what's going on? And not just like go through the steps, but really be empowered in their learning process. So I think being able to afford that kind of opportunity for growth, especially in a very small community where we don't have a lot of non-service related jobs, it felt really important because, while, there aren't many small shops out there, I think that sense of growth could translate to many careers. Really, is like knowing that it is a very technical skill, but you can learn it. And I mean, just like me, like I came from a world of IT, and then, I'm gutting an animal and figuring out how composting works, and anybody can learn anything. And I think sometimes we get into such a routine in life that we stop seeing outside these boundaries we create for ourselves. But, it's just a good reminder that, those are self-imposed and should be torn down, and it's empowering. I mean, for example, we had a huge shakeup, and our slaughter manager ended up becoming our butcher, lead production butcher, and then we brought in a woman who ended up taking the slaughter manager role on. And honestly, she had a couple of months of experience when she was in college, and it had been a long time, and she absolutely killed it. And she just jumped in and she figured it all out. And actually, when we sold, she ended up getting the lead slaughter position at the new location where they moved all of our slaughter units to. I mean, they saw her work. And so it's like, she is moving up in her career. And, it's just, sometimes people need to be given that opportunity and also believe in themselves. But I mean, there's so much opportunity in agriculture, because I think that it's very hard work. And so it definitely scares off the faint of heart. And so, like, if you're a hard worker and you believe, like, the sky's the limit, really, I think, for what you can do to expand your horizons.
Like, got a tear to my eye. Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, this webinar is offered through an educational institution, and so often we're trying to figure out how to really have students have a growth mindset, that, like, just because you're not there now does not mean you're stuck. Like, it can always get better. So it's super cool to hear, being like, well, I had never gutted a cow before, and now I'm in charge of the whole thing. So yeah.
Well, and I think too, just, I mean, looking at jobs online, or, however you do it now, I think that's the way, right? It's always like this list of, things you need to know how to do. And yes, of course, that's true. And that's a baseline. But I think more than anything, your sense of, curiosity and motivation and really just optimism for life, that gets you a job. I really believe it, because I mean, yeah, okay, you might not know it today, but if you're the kind of person who's proven that you can learn and you want to learn, I would say, don't let those bullet pointed list of things you must already know restrict your sort of realm of possibility.
That's awesome. I'm going to jump around in our questions, though, because it just led in so nicely. So, and maybe you've just answered this question, but if you were going to hire someone to help you in your work, so, however you would like help, or however you would have liked help, what would you look for in the applicant? It sounds like not necessarily those specific skills, but is there anything, if somebody was wanting to take a next step and work for you?
I think that, in addition to just that, sense of belief in your own ability to learn and your desire to learn, that we talked about, I think one key thing is people who are problem solvers. So, I mean, we would have so many things, as we were talking about, come up, and so, what I want, and the person I want on my team, is not the person who's like, we have a problem, and then they're waiting for you to answer the question or like what to do. It's the people who are like, for example, this is a great example. People who come to you with like, but maybe we could try this or that, or what about this? I mean, Cheyenne was our vegetarian packager, and she, memorized all the cuts and became the queen of the packaging machine. I mean, the girl had crazy long nails, and, you would look at her and you'd be like, this woman does not know how to operate a machine. But every time something funky would happen, she'd get on the call with support. She'd do this, she'd do that, she'd figure it out. I mean, so then it was like, by the end, she changed her role, and she was working in the office, and there was someone else doing packaging. But every time they had a problem, they were like, Cheyenne, help. because she just decided she was going to become the master of it. It wasn't her job really, but she decided to learn the troubleshooting. And so it's like, that's what you need. It's like, okay, well, someone accidentally cut the leg off of or cut the tendon on the cow, and you hang the whole carcass from that. What are we doing? It's not like, it's like, well, what do we have? We have chain, we have wire. What can we do to wire it up? So it's not going to happen unless you figure it out. So I think that's it, is creative solutions. Like if you're on a desert island alone and you have a problem, there's no one to call. What are you going to try? And just like approach it all like that. It may not be the perfect solution, but it's a start, so just get creative.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like, yeah, how many times anyway, yes. It's especially if you grew up in a city and there is more of that, like, oh yeah, there's a repair guy, or you just buy a new one because you live in a place where there's stores with things. It's really hard to even consider that you could actually just be like, well, YouTube, let's see what's actually going on. Yeah. I'm gonna shift.
Sorry, one more thing.
Yeah.
Is I think, because especially when you're dealing with food, and there's critical rules to ensure food safety. You need to make sure that you are, yes, okay, following the rules, that's obvious. We've got HACCP plans, and there's a way that you must operate to, mitigate any kind of risk that could be brought into the process. But also holding that confidence when you're questioned. We had several hunters and not just hunters, people who would shoot their own cow because it was too wild to get in the trailer and then bring it on over. And there was some serious health concern associated with some of these things. I mean, like this one guy, his horse ran away with the elk legs tied to it. It was gone for like 2 days, and it was a summer, and then he finally brought him in, and we're like, yeah, no, like you can take that on your own and process it if you want, but you've got to be confident enough to hold your own when what's safe, because there's just a lot of different standards, and it's that's another important quality. So anybody that came through our system, had to go through HACCP training and read the documents and sign that they agreed. And then we relied on them to stand up for themselves and to represent us. And in several cases, like that happened. And so be the person who is able to at least raise your hand and be like, I'm not sure if this is right. Even if you're not an expert, you understand the baseline safety regulations, and you have to be able to hold your own.
Again, it comes back to that like empowerment piece, right? Of like either building up confidence and having power there, or just starting there, just assuming that you have more power than you might think you do once you've come to a place.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're about on schedule, I think, with this being the first one. I'm going to transition us to a little bit different, more day to day, because I think a lot of people don't really like. There are things that people value, and then they don't know if a job is going to align with how much vacation they want or that kind of thing. So the next is sort of getting at some things that I think are pretty common for people to be curious about for a position. So, how much time are you at a computer? How much time did you spend on the road? And how much time did you spend outdoors?
Well, I'm in my role, I would say that I probably spent half of my time in front of the computer, because for a majority of the existence of Marfa Meats, I was kind of everything back office. So, answering the phone, taking orders, dealing with people's pickups, billing, all of the Instagram and Facebook and marketing stuff and, really all of that. So half the time I spent doing that. And the other half I was what I would call the floater. So, if we were down a person on the slaughter side, I'd be helping with that. If we were down a person in production, I'd be helping with that. Like, depending on the day, back and forth to the cooler. We also had retail here. So running retail, running back, because we had a small sort of supply in retail, and often people want specialty things. So we're running back and forth through the cooler. So I really loved having that physical element in my day and being outside. To me, that's like the best case scenario, to have a little bit of each. But for the folks that worked on the production floor, I mean, they were in the cooler, 40-degree temperatures all day long, starting from hour to hour, it may change. I mean, they might have been breaking down a carcass into subprimals, or, if it was like the end of the day, usually that's when we're doing all the grind. So like shoving stuff into the grinder, packaging hamburger, weighing out, 1 or 2 pound packages. So like, that's kind of the production floor. And then on the slaughter side, it was always like, depending on how many animals we had come through. Sometimes if it's just a couple, it's an early day. They've finished their work. And so they're outside to bring the animals in, and then they're inside for the processing of those. So in the summer, it was really hot, and in the winter, it sucked. And it's just, you're very subject to the elements on that side of the house. So it just, yeah.
Not to mention being outside and having the odors of compost.
I think everyone got really used to that.
I mean, you could smell it, but it wasn't terrible having visited at the end.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, like, if it's working, it doesn't really smell. It just, some days it's a little right.
Yeah. You may have touched on this. What did you do on your favorite days at work?
I think my favorite days were connecting with the producers. So, if we had new people come in and drop off, just talking to them and understanding what their operations like, and especially, and also when people pick up, getting to connect with them. And then one thing that we did that isn't so common around here anyway is the ability to provide people with cuts maybe they've never heard of before. Or like, people be dropping off and they're like, oh, I don't want the oxtail, I don't want the cheeks. I'm like, oh my gosh, if you never had braised oxtail, like, oh, it's so good. And they'd be like, oh, okay. So it's like connecting like what the final product is going to be when they're actually dropping it off and making these decisions. Because I think, a lot of places, when they provide their cut sheet, which is how you want your animal cut up, there aren't that many options, and people just don't know what's available. And so being able to connect with them and show them how much their animal can provide, that they're not aware of, because it's just not been an option available to them at other meat packers. So that was really cool.
That's super cool. Yeah, again, it comes back to the relationship piece, right? It's like that's neat. What did you not like about your job?
Well, I would say the most difficult part was, it's always people, it's like, that's the best and the worst part, especially when, we had a really small group. So, if someone doesn't come in, everyone suffers. And so then, an important player doesn't show up for the day, everybody else is going to have to work much harder, and so there's like a different energy. And so, those days were rough. And I guess also cleaning in the summer is terrible. because the slaughter unit was so hot, and then the water's really hot, and then there's blood everywhere, and it's, not my favorite. That was not a fun one.
Let's see. Oh, I'm getting there. What kind of vacations do you get to take? How much flexibility do you have? Or what else is important to you about this work-life balance? So some people really care about vacations, but you can also broaden it out.
Well, in our operation, there were seasonal fluctuations. So, for example, when it starts raining here in July, usually. And so, when it's raining, nobody wants to get their animals slaughtered because all of a sudden there's free food in the pasture because now there's rain and it means there's grass. And so they're not going to slaughter an animal if it can eat from July to September and, gain some pounds. They're just going to wait. So, we'll have like a slow period in the summer. So for us, it was kind of no big deal if people take their vacation when we already are a little bit slow. So I'm sure that's similar in a lot of operations. I know my family are farmers, and so it's like, okay, well, like once everything's harvested, there's, a good deal of time. Yeah, they can go fix the fences and stuff, but like there's a little bit of downtime. So, I think it's like that with many things. And so as long as vacations are in the downtime, and we always took time for holidays because we had a lot of people that moved here from other places to work here. It's very difficult to get anywhere from Marfa. So it's not like you can just go somewhere for the weekend. It's 3 hours to get to the airport. So we always took off like a week and a half around Christmas so that people could go and do what they wanted to do. Yeah.
Was there anything else important to you about work-life balance? Like I happen to know that I think you lived on site, like with all of these other things happening, and how was that?
I personally had no work-life balance.
That's where I was getting.
Yeah, because I was here, and I mean, when you're basically working and living in the same place, people are constantly here. People are like, oh, well, can I just come pick up on Sunday morning because I'm passing through town? I'm like, well, I'm here, so okay. I think that in a sense, I could have instilled some more effective boundaries around that. But at the same time, it is one of those businesses where, your customers, they live out on a ranch, and if they're already coming to town on Sunday for church and they can save themselves 2 hours drive, that's a service we can provide. So I think, had I some help, it wouldn't have been so taxing. But I mean, in the end, it's all part of a big system, and I'm just a piece of that system. And so I think trying to hold to very firm hours, it just doesn't make sense for the community that we're in, and knowing people's restrictions. And yeah. But yeah, I worked all the time, but I also loved it. I mean, I have never had a job that felt more important and meaningful to me, even though I made $0, I made negative dollars. It's the best thing I've ever done.
It turns out lots of us make decisions that are not in our own best financial interest sometimes, and there's some really good reasons to do that sometimes. What did I miss? We touched on a lot of things, and and really pretty intentionally, and I love how you did this. We didn't actually go into like, sort of what is a slaughterhouse, what is a processor. I'm going to encourage anyone who's interested to go look on YouTube, because this really is about like, how does it feel to do the work, and what does it take to actually do the work rather than the work itself. So I just really appreciate that you kept sort of keeping it there of like, why was it important? How did it align with values and all of that? What else? What did we not talk about that you would be interested in mentioning?
Well, I mean, I think I would say I mean, presumably the audience listening to this is interested in a career in agriculture. I would say that there are many out here anyway. There are many producers that are also doing other things. And so, Mitch and Gary, the Ellery's boys that I ended up buying all of our beef cattle from, Mitch runs a molasses business, and he's got some big equipment that he operates, and so there it can be intimidating from a financial perspective, knowing that this career might not earn you the particular dollar figure that you had in mind, at least initially. I would say if you have the passion for it, there are ways to make it work. And out here, you see it all the time, because people are doing multiple things, and maybe they're complementary, but maybe, like a good chunk of the money comes from another business. And so there's a way to sort of do the dance. And as time goes on, it all gets sorted out one way or another. I mean, in this particular business, I was all in because you had to be. There's no way to do this halfway. However, definitely from a producer perspective, there's absolutely a way to do that, because a lot of the time your cows are just eating, and you just need to make sure that they have water. But get creative. I mean, I think really that's the key to life. But especially in this field, you have to be curious and creative, and there's a lot of ways to put the puzzle together.
And then I think the last thing that is that you don't have to do something forever.
Yeah.
It's like you can try it and it cannot work, and you still show up in the world.
I mean, there is nothing that is a better teacher than failure. I mean, and they say it, it's I forget the exact phrase, but there's something about like entrepreneurship is so addicting because you're doing something that's meaningful to you, and you feel good working that hard for something that matters, and everything else kind of comes together, so it's tough now for me, because now I'm looking for a contract job just so I can make some money for a while and regroup, which I'll do, and it'll be fine. But I can tell you that my mind is already on like what the next thing is, because I am now chasing that feeling. I would rather be making $0 and like hauling a load of guts than sit in front of my computer, implementing financial software any day of the week. So yeah, we'll see what the next chapter looks like.